Almost everyone online has an opinion on how to become a millionaire. Most often it's loud, it's anecdotal, and very rarely is it backed by real data. So today we're not turning to social media. We're going to ask the Federal Reserve because the Fed doesn't guess. They track millions of households with assets, debt, age, income, behaviors. It is one of the most detailed data sets we have on wealth in the US. And when you look at that data, 5 very clear habits show up over and over again among real-world millionaires. But before we talk about habits, we need to be precise. The word millionaire gets thrown around so loosely that it can feel kind of meaningless. So we're not going to use social media's definition. We're going to go by the Federal Reserve. And according to the Survey of Consumer Finances, which looks at households, a millionaire household is a household that has a net worth of $1 million. And if you know me and you know my channel, we're going to break this down 2 ways because the Fed does give us data in both categories. We're going to go over a millionaire household that includes primary residence as well as a millionaire household that excludes it. A paid-off home absolutely improves security, but it doesn't function like investable assets. Investable assets are what actually provide income you can live on. So unless your home generates rent, it belongs in a different category because treating your home and investable assets as identical can lead to poor financial conclusions. One more thing, and this is critical, we're not going to use averages. Averages are distorted by ultra-wealthy households and tell you very little about what's normal or repeatable. Instead, we're going to focus on medians, the middle ground, because medians show us what most millionaires actually look like. Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. If you've ever wondered what millionaires look like, not aspirationally, not hypothetically, but statistically, you're in the right place. Habit number 1, they save a lot. Consistently, not perfectly. When people picture millionaires, they generally have 2 images that show up. They either picture someone on a yacht or a private jet, or someone living in extreme frugality. No spending, no fun. But this is not what the data shows. According to the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, millionaires do save differently. But here's the thing, it's not obsession, it's not deprivation, it's consistency. When you look at savings behavior by net worth percentile, a clear pattern emerges. Millionaire households typically save around 20 to 25% of their income. Non-millionaire households save closer to 5 to 8%. And nearly 80% of millionaire households report saving regularly, even during years when income is uneven or disrupted. That last point matters a lot, and it's often more than people realize because it's not just about earning more. It's about saving consistently even when life gets messy, even when there's job changes, when you have kids, when there's a move, no matter what the economic cycles look like. Millionaires don't save when it's convenient, they save by default. And when you cross-reference income and savings and behavior throughout the Survey of Consumer Finances, something very important shows up. Most millionaires did not start out with extraordinary incomes. What separates them is this high baseline savings rate applied over several decades. What really shows up is structural discipline. Savings and investing comes off the top. Lifestyle grows more slowly than income, and the habit persists year after year. And this is perhaps the most important piece. When income pressure shows up, millionaire households are less likely to abandon their saving strategy entirely than non-millionaire households. They're more likely to slow lifestyle growth, delay upgrades, or temporarily scale back discretionary spending. Savings doesn't disappear, it flexes. And that distinction matters. And it's not necessarily that millionaires have higher discipline. They have structural differences in place. They tend to lock savings in automatically through retirement and brokerage contributions. They avoid fixed expenses that are hard to unwind, and they keep housing, cars, and lifestyle costs at levels that leave margin. So when pressure hits, they have room to maneuver without touching savings first. In contrast, non-millionaire millionaire households often have the habit of saving what's left over. They might carry high fixed costs, and when the income runs tight, savings is the first to go because there isn't room in the budget to cut anything else. This doesn't mean that millionaire households never reduce their savings rate. They absolutely do. There are times in the data when we see the savings rate dip consistently. Often during child-rearing years, daycare is incredibly expensive. I can vouch for that one. During business launches, career pivots, or even major health challenges. But the difference is this: they treat those periods as temporary adjustments, not permanent resets of the habit. And no, they didn't always save 25% of their income. When you look at just starting out in careers, it's very typical that their savings rate was, well, average. But as their income increased, so too did their savings rate. Every time they got a bonus or every time their income experienced a jump, they captured some of that and put it towards savings and investments rather than letting lifestyle capture it all. So the real habit is to build the capacity to save more over time and then actually do it. That is how seemingly small and unremarkable percentages over time turn into seven-figure portfolios. Habit number 2, they invest. All of them. Here's an uncomfortable truth the data makes very clear, and something my brother often said to me when we were kids: you can't save your way to $1 million, not without asset growth. When you look at the survey of consumer finances, investment participation is one of the clearest dividing lines between millionaire and non-millionaire households. Over 90% of millionaire households own equities, including direct stock ownership, mutual funds and ETFs, retirement accounts like 401ks and IRAs. By contrast, only about 55% of non-millionaire households invest at all. That gap alone explains an enormous share of the wealth difference. Saving is important, but investing, this is the crucial step: how you put your dollars to work. Because for the everyday person, without this step, becoming a millionaire is nearly impossible. And when you break asset ownership down by net worth percentile, something important happens around the middle of the distribution. Equity ownership rises sharply once households cross roughly $300,000 to $500,000 in net worth. Below that level, many households rely heavily on cash and home equity. Above that, portfolios decisively shift towards growth-producing assets. Millionaires are very rarely cash-heavy. I know cash feels safe, but it doesn't compound. And over a long period of time, with the absence of compounding, sitting in cash alone and gaining no interest is far more dangerous than market volatility. To put real numbers on that, if you had $100 in January of 2000, by the end of 2025, you'd need roughly $195 just to have the same purchasing power. In real terms, cash lost about half its value over 25 years. And here's another nuance the data makes clear. Millionaires are not stock-picking geniuses. They don't have exotic investments. They aren't constantly trading. They're simply participating. They stay invested through market cycles, recessions, volatility, and long stretches of uncertainty. I always like to say that the most important decision you will ever make is to simply get invested at all. How your portfolio is structured and what you invest in is secondary to that. Wealth doesn't come from timing the markets. It comes from time in the markets. And saving determines what you keep, but investing determines what your money can become. And the survey of consumer finances shows this pattern again and again. Households that consistently invest, even imperfectly, end up dramatically wealthier than households that primarily hold cash, even with similar incomes. So the habit here isn't brilliance, it's participation. Millionaires don't wait until they feel confident to start investing. They simply start investing and then the confidence follows. Investing is really what builds your engine for long-term wealth. Habit number 3, they use tax-advantaged accounts aggressively. I feel like this is where a lot of people get tripped up. They want to debate a Roth versus a traditional, talk about optimizing their tax brackets now and in the future, before they have hardly any assets put away at all. But the data tells a much simpler story. Over 85% of millionaire households hold assets in tax-advantaged accounts, meaning 401ks, IRAs, Roth accounts, and other tax-deferred or tax-free vehicles. And that difference isn't subtle. When you look at the median investable assets by net worth percentile, millionaire households typically hold $500,000 to $700,000 in retirement accounts. Non-millionaire households hold less than $70,000. That gap alone explains a massive portion of the wealth divide. And it's not about being clever. It's not about perfectly choosing the Roth or the traditional. It's simply about getting started and staying invested. When you break down retirement account ownership by net worth, the pattern is clear. Higher net worth households don't just have retirement accounts, they actually fund them year after year. And the behavior is pretty obvious that they're funding them year after year, because you don't end up with account balances that are $500,000 or $700,000 with occasional and sporadic contributions. It happens through consistency. This is why tax strategy is second order. First order decision is simply, are you consistently using the tax advantage space available to you? Because tax advantage accounts do three powerful things all at once. They allow you to automate savings and investing, they reduce friction and leakage, and they allow compounding to work without annual tax drag. And tax drag isn't insignificant. Over the course of an entire working career, it could easily add up to a six-figure difference in account balances. So wherever these tax-advantaged accounts are available to you, take advantage of them. Only once you have assets does the question of optimization become important. Roth versus traditional? Yes, it's important, but discuss it later. Conversions, they can be important later. Withdrawal sequencing, later it can become important. None of that matters if you don't have anything in your accounts. So the best thing you can do is to simply get started. And when you're getting started, you absolutely do not need a financial advisor. Just get invested. Millionaires don't treat retirement accounts as an afterthought. They treat them as the core infrastructure of wealth building. Getting money into these tax-advantaged accounts and taking advantage of a really long time horizon, that is how you turn ordinary contributions into extraordinary wealth. Habit number 4, they control the big expenses, especially housing. This one surprises a lot of people because immediately when you picture a millionaire, you might picture a big home or upgrading the home or upgrading the lifestyle. But that's not what the data shows. According to the Federal Reserve, millionaire households consistently carry lower housing cost to income ratios than non-millionaire households, even though they could afford much more. When you look at debt to income ratios by net worth percentiles, the pattern is clear. As net worth rises, debt burdens fall. Housing debt in particular becomes a smaller share of income, and high net worth households are far less stretched by fixed monthly obligations. And it's certainly not that they don't buy homes, they just make different housing decisions. Here's what the data shows. Millionaire households are much more likely to buy once and stay put, avoid serial upgrading, and pay off mortgages earlier than lower net worth households. In fact, many millionaire households were millionaires before they ever upgraded their homes. They didn't become millionaires by upgrading, and that distinction is critical. When you compare housing value to total net worth, primary residence makes up a greater share of total net worth with non-millionaire households and a much smaller share when it comes to millionaire households. In other words, as wealth grows, housing becomes less central. This tells us something important about how wealth is actually built. Millionaires don't maximize lifestyle, they maximize optionality. They make choices in their life, including housing, that leaves room to have cash flow, to have room in their budget, that leaves room for saving and investing and other lifestyle features outside of their mortgage. Housing is one of the biggest financial decisions you will ever make. In fact, there are really only about 5 major financial decisions that you have to get right, housing being one of them, to make sure you're on the right track. Everything else, well, it's pretty insignificant. And I do have a full video that goes over these 5 that I will link here if you're interested in checking it out. Housing isn't just a line item, it's a constraint. And the tighter that constraint, the harder everything else in your life is. The lower you keep your housing costs, the more flexibility you have. You increase your ability to save through lifestyle disruptions, your ability to invest consistently, your ability to say no to stress-induced decisions. It's all about margin. It's not that millionaires don't want a nice home or that they don't have them. They very well may, but it's about making sure that you have room within your budget to do other things than pay for housing. Habit number 5, they stay invested for a long time. This is the habit that quietly underpins every other one. Looking at the data, one pattern that stands out immediately is the median age of a millionaire household head is around 60. Most people don't become millionaires early, they become millionaires eventually. And despite what social media or the news would have you believe, most don't inherit their wealth. They build it slowly over time. If you examine the data, you'll notice that wealth is not built in a linear fashion. Rather, it's really slow going in the beginning. But then something magical happens when you're several decades in. Maybe you're 40, maybe you're 45, maybe you're 50. And it's not just that people suddenly become smarter investors. It's just that they've had enough time investing that compounding really starts to take over and we see exponential growth. And I think that part is so important that I want to make sure it's really heard. In your 20s and in your 30s, it is hard. It is you doing the legwork, saving, investing, cutting expenses, doing all of these things without seeing much in the way of visible payoff. And so often the message we hear is that we're behind if you don't yet have a 6-figure net worth or you don't yet have a 7-figure net worth. But the reality is this is not the age where millionaires are built. Rather, this is the age where the foundation is laid. And if you lay this foundation with time, and as long as you stick to it, you likely will build that level of wealth. I'm an avid runner, so another way I like to think about this, if you've ever done a marathon, you have to complete all 26.2 miles. And the only way to get to mile 26 is to keep going when you're at mile 12. 13, 14, and every mile after that. There's no skipping ahead. Every step along the way matters, and I like to think about wealth the same way. On the journey to becoming a millionaire, you have to get to the point where you have $100,000 invested, and then $200,000, and every milestone after that. There's no skipping steps. You don't just wake up one day and skip to the finish line. You earn it by showing up day after day, mile by mile. Patience is incredibly important in the wealth building process. And this is really where time beats income. A higher income helps, but it's not the dominant driver. Duration in the market is. Most millionaire households cross the $1 million mark later in life, after decades of saving and investing and staying the course through recessions and crashes and market cycles and long stretches where progress felt invisible. Becoming a millionaire is not about speed. It's about survival. It's about staying invested long enough to let compounding take over. It's not a sprint. It is a 30, 40, or 50-year glide path. And it's not about making every single decision perfectly. It's about staying on the course and not exiting earlier than necessary. Before we wrap up, there's one more important thing the data makes very clear. And it's just as important as the habits themselves. Millionaires do not all share the same advantages that many people assume they do. They did not all earn ultra-high incomes. In fact, many built 7-figure net worths in investable assets while having household incomes that never surpassed $150,000 a year. They did not have perfect market timing. They didn't get in perfectly at the bottom or out at the top. They lived through recessions and crashes and market cycles and volatility and uncertainty just like everyone else. They did not rely on exotic investments. No private invite-only investments, no secret asset classes, no complex strategies. Rather, most built their wealth with plain old vanilla investments. And they did not have financial advisors from day one. Most millionaire households were really DIY investors for decades before they ever turned to a professional. And even then, it was only once complexity increased through taxes, retirement income, estate planning, or business or family transitions. So really what the data shows is that there's no brilliance, there's no shortcuts, just simple, disciplined, but repeatable behaviors that you can stick to for decades. And that's really great news because it means that becoming a millionaire isn't reserved for a special group of people. It's for those who are willing to stay the course and trust the process. The data is clear. Most millionaires weren't early, perfect, or exceptional. They were just persistent. They focused on the big levers, ignored the noise, and stayed invested long enough for consistency to do its work. What are your thoughts on everyday millionaires? Are there any other habits you would add to this list? Share them in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. Or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. The word millionaire gets thrown around so often that often it feels... I'm not going to say often and often. Did you hear it? I said it twice. I'm not going to do that. Thrown around so loosely and so often that it often... did you hear often and often back to back? We're not doing that either. Try again. Take 47. I don't think those do anything. Oh, when I was with the money guys, they actually have a little... I don't know if it does anything, but they have one. It's very official. We do not have one. We're sitting in a room in my house. Nothing about this channel is official.